the heart of a vast, untamed forest, a sanctuary stood as the last true haven for wildlife. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the sky above was a blanket of gray that seemed to press down on the dense canopy of trees. In this remote corner of the world, the creatures roamed freely, and the sanctuary's keeper, a solitary figure named Eliza, had built her life around preserving the delicate balance of the wilderness. The animals here were not just residents. The baker were her kin. The forest was alive with sound. Whispers of the wind, the rustling of leaves, and the occasional screech of a bird cutting through the stillness. But it was the owls that captivated Eliza the most. For years she had watched them in silence, learning their habits, their movements, and their patterns. The sanctuary was famous for being the barn owl capital, a place where these nocturnal creatures thrived, far from the encroachments of civilization. Eliza had spent years nurturing the land, ensuring the habitat was perfect for these creatures. The tall, swaying grasses, the scattered remnants of dead wood, and the secluded barns made the perfect homes for the owls. As dusk fell and the temperature dropped, she would wander the grounds, listening to the soft hoot of the owls as they emerged from the shadows. It was on one such evening that things began to change. The air was cooler than usual, a sharp bite that felt like an omen. Eliza stood by the edge of a clearing, watching the horizon for any sign of movement. The owls had started hunting earlier than usual, flitting through the trees in search of their prey. She could hear the flapping of wings, the soft hoots carried on the wind. There were more than usual tonight. The sounds seemed to reverberate off the thick trees, filling the air with an unsettling rhythm. Something felt wrong. The harmony of the sanctuary, usually so peaceful and serene, was broken. Eliza's steps grew slower as she walked deeper into the forest, her eyes scanning the shadows. The evening had an oppressive weight to it, as if the very earth beneath her feet was holding its breath. As she moved further, the sounds of the forest grew louder, more frantic. The air was thick with the scent of damp leaves and something else, a musk, a predator smell. Eliza's heart quickened as she neared the old barn at the center of the sanctuary. The barn was a haven for the owls, their nesting grounds, but tonight the barn was silent. Not a single owl was perched on the rafters. She felt a chill crawl up her spine, and her instincts screamed at her to turn back, but she pressed on. The barn door creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, the air was musty and the shadows stretched long across the floor. She peered into the darkness, her breath coming out in soft clouds of vapor. The owl's usual soft hoots had turned into something else, an eerie silence that seemed to smother the space. But then she heard it, the faintest sound of wings. But it wasn't the soft flutter of an... Eliza's pulse raced. She moved cautiously toward the back of the barn, her eyes straining to pierce the darkness. Suddenly, the floorboards beneath her creaked, and she froze. The weight of something, or someone, moved in the shadows. Her breath caught in her throat. Something was wrong. There was a presence in the barn, something that didn't belong. The barn door slammed shut behind her with a deafening crash, and the light from the setting sun flickered out as the last rays of day disappeared beneath the tree line. Panic gripped her chest as she realized she was no longer alone. The air in the barn grew colder, and the smell of musk intensified. Her eyes darted around, but the shadows seemed to swallow everything. Then she heard the sound again, the heavy, calculated flapping of wings. But it wasn't the soft flutter of an owl's wings. It was something else, something unnatural. She took a step back, feeling a prickling sensation along the back of her neck. The hairs on her arms stood on end. Suddenly, a shape darted from the corner of the barn, and Eliza jumped back, heart racing. It was too fast, too quiet. The creature moved like a shadow, its movement so fluid that it seemed to merge with the darkness itself. Eliza could feel the weight of its presence as it circled her, stalking her like a predator. Then, it stopped. The wings went silent. Eliza held her breath, every nerve in her body screaming. Her mind raced, but she couldn't make sense of the situation. She reached for the flashlight in her pocket and clicked it on, the beam slicing through the darkness. The light swept across the barn, but there was nothing there, just shadows, The tension in the air grew unbearable. She could feel her heartbeat thudding in her chest, the world narrowing to that one point of light in the darkness. And then, in the far corner of the barn, she saw it. An owl. Its eyes gleamed in the beam of the flashlight, glowing like embers in the night. But something was off. Its body was twisted, its feathers torn and ragged, and beneath it the unmistakable form of another owl lay, still, lifeless. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. She slowly backed away, her eyes fixed on the creature in front of her. It was watching her, its head cocked to the side, its eyes unblinking. A low hoot echoed from the far corner and the owl's body shifted. It was not an owl at all. The creature was too large, its wings too wide, its body far too thick. It was a predator. And it was hunting. Before Eliza could react, the creature lunged, its massive wings snapping through the air with a force that shook the barn. She stumbled backward, her mind a blur of panic and fear. The creature swiped at her with a talon-like claw, its grip tightening around her arm. She screamed, but no sound escaped her mouth. She could feel its cold breath on her skin, its hot, putrid scent filling her nostrils. Just as quickly as it had struck, the creature released her, and Eliza tumbled backward into the shadows, her heart racing. The barn was silent again, the creature gone, but the danger still lingered. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of death. Eliza's breath came in ragged gasps, her body trembling. She didn't know what she had just encountered, whether it was a creature of the forest, a predator from another world, or something even darker. But she knew one thing: the barn, the sanctuary that had always been her safe haven, had become something else. Something dangerous. And as she stood in the darkness, staring at the spot where the creature had vanished, she realized that the true danger wasn't just the predators that roamed the forest. It was something deeper, something ancient, and it had just awakened. Eliza's mind raced as she scrambled to her feet, every sense heightened by the lingering presence of the creature. The barn, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap, a hollow cage that held secrets older than the trees outside. The floor beneath her was cold, the wood creaking with every slight movement, and the shadows seemed to lengthen unnaturally, closing in around her. She glanced around for any sign of her surroundings. The flashlight was still clenched in her hand, the beam weakly flickering in the encroaching darkness. Panic threatened to overtake her, but Eliza forced herself to breathe, to steady her thoughts. She had been through this before, countless times with the creatures she had studied, with the challenges of nature's unpredictability. But this was different. This felt wrong. She wasn't just dealing with nature's chaos. This was something foreign, something sinister. It turned toward the barn doors, now shut fast, the sound of her pulse roaring in her ears. The heavy flap of wings echoed through the barn again, but this time it was distant, almost as though the creature was circling beyond the barn's thick wooden walls. Her heart raced. She had to leave, but the creature, whatever it was out there, waiting. She knew that if she stayed, it would only return, more determined than before. With a slow, deliberate motion, Eliza reached down and grabbed the flashlight tightly. The air was getting colder, the chill creeping deeper into her bones. The barn had once been her home, the place where she connected with the creatures she had protected. Now, it felt like a tomb. Stepping toward the back of the barn, she checked every corner, listening for any movement, feeling the hair on the back of her neck rise. The silence had returned, but it was too still, too quiet. Suddenly, the beam of light caught something, a shimmer of movement just beyond the far side of the barn. She swung the flashlight in that direction, but there was nothing there, only more shadows. Her breath came in quick bursts now. She couldn't leave. She couldn't let the sanctuary fall. She had to figure out what was happening. Had something disturbed the delicate balance of the sanctuary? Was it the owls, too many of them suddenly appearing to fight for territory? Or was there a predator more dangerous than any she had ever known? Something that had come here for a reason. She took a cautious step forward, her feet creaking against the old wooden floorboards. The scent of musk was heavier now, a rancid animal stench that made her stomach churn. And then she saw it again. The glint of those eyes. The creature wasn't hiding anymore. It stood in the far corner of the barn, its body larger than any owl she had ever seen. Its feathers were dark and matted, like a cloak of night itself. It stared at her with those unsettling eyes, large, bright, and unblinking. There was no question now, it wasn't an owl. The predator had taken the form of an owl, a twisted reflection of what should have been, a creature born from something darker. And Eliza realized with a start that it wasn't just hunting her, it was hunting the entire sanctuary. The balance had been disturbed, and the creature had come to claim this place for its own. Her hand shot out, gripping the barn's old lantern, a flickering light that had been left behind on a shelf. Eliza held it high, her breath steadying. The light was faint, but it would have to do. With the creature still watching her, she moved quickly toward the barn's back wall, seeking an escape. She wasn't afraid of the dark, not anymore, but this was something far more dangerous than anything she had ever known. As she reached the door, the barn suddenly shook. An earthquake, a tremor in the earth beneath her. Eliza stumbled and fell to her knees. The ground was pulsing, vibrating like it had a heartbeat of its own. The sound of wings flapping grew louder, the air thickening with the noise. The creature had moved. Closer, faster than she could react. It was above her, directly above her, circling with an eerie, ghostly cry. Her eyes snapped up, and she saw it. Its large, twisted wings stretching out in the shadows, blocking the only way out. But there was something else, a glimmer of light, faint but unmistakable, coming from the barn's other exit. The owl, or whatever it was blocking the main entrance, but the side door was still open. She didn't hesitate. Eliza surged to her feet, darting toward the side door, her heart pounding with every step. The wings beat louder, a deafening rush of air, but she pushed through, determined to make it out. She was so close, almost there. The barn door slammed shut with a thunderous bang. She was trapped again. Her flashlight flickered out, plunging her back into darkness. The only light remaining was the moon, casting thin slivers of pale light through the cracks in the barn. The creature's wings beat again, and Eliza could hear the scrape of claws on the wood. She could feel it now. Its eyes, sharp and hungry, scanning her from every corner. Eliza knew she couldn't win in a fight. Her only chance was to outsmart it, to wait for the right moment to escape. The barn was alive now, vibrating with the creature's energy, and just when Eliza thought she could no longer bear the weight of the darkness, a soft sound reached her ears. The unmistakable sound of wings, this time not the creature's, but the soft, gentle flapping of an owl's wings. The owls had returned. She froze, not daring to breathe. The owls had always come to her, and now they were gathering around her, surrounding the barn. They were not afraid. They were powerful, confident, and they had heard her call. Their hoots filled the night air, rising in a chorus that pierced through the silence. They circled the barn, their wings cutting through the shadows, forcing the predator to retreat. The air grew still again. The creature, realizing it was no match for the power of the owls, disappeared into the darkness, leaving only the echoes of its wings behind. Eliza sank to her knees, exhausted, as the owls perched on the rafters above her, their eyes glowing softly in the moonlight. For a moment the world stood still, the tension evaporating into the night air. The sanctuary had been saved, but Eliza knew that the balance of the forest had been altered. Whatever the creature was, it would return, and next time, it wouldn't be so easily driven away. Eliza slowly rose to her feet, her knees weak from the adrenaline that had coursed through her only moments ago. The barn was still, but the air felt thick with the weight of something unspoken. The owls watched her with their silent, knowing eyes, their heads tilting slightly, as if acknowledging her presence in the same way one might acknowledge an old friend. But Eliza's mind was racing. She had no illusions about the nature of the creature that had attacked. The twisted form of that owl-like predator, something far darker than anything she had encountered in her years of working with the sanctuary, was not something she could easily forget. Its eyes had burned with malice, its presence had been suffocating, and its hunger, that was a hunger that had tasted blood before. She stepped carefully toward the side door, her eyes still scanning the rafters where the owls now perched. They were calm now, their eerie, gentle hoots filling the silence, as if assuring her that they had not abandoned her. But in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that the worst had only just begun. The sanctuary had always been a place of peace, a refuge for the creatures of the forest and the world beyond. It had been Eliza's home for so long, a place where the sounds of nature blended harmoniously together. The rustle of leaves, the chirp of crickets, and the calls of owls. But tonight something had shifted. The forest was no longer just a sanctuary for animals, it was becoming a battleground. With trembling hands, Eliza gathered what little courage she had left and moved to the barn door once more, opening it slowly. The air outside was cool and sharp, the scent of pine and earth filling her lungs. But it was different now, almost unnatural, like the woods themselves had grown tense. The wind had died and the trees stood unnervingly still. Even the owls that had once filled the night with their cries had fallen silent. It was as if the forest were holding its breath. Eliza stepped outside, her senses heightened. The world around her felt smaller somehow, constricted, as if the trees were crowding in closer, the shadows longer and darker. She could feel the weight of the predator's presence, as if it were still watching her, lurking just beyond the edge of the forest. As she walked, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of moss, Eliza felt the pulse of the forest around her, its vibrations, its rhythm. The owls had not left, and their presence, now a quiet, constant hum in the back of her mind, was a reminder of the fragile peace she had once taken for granted. She could still feel their eyes on her, though she couldn't see them in the darkened canopy above. But something was wrong. The usual sounds of the forest, the distant rustling of animals, the occasional splash of water from the nearby creek, were absent. The world seemed to be holding still, waiting for something to happen. Eliza's hand instinctively reached for the small pocket knife in her jacket, though she knew it wouldn't do much against the horror that had emerged from the shadows. Then she heard it, a soft rustling from the underbrush ahead, a faint, rapid beating of wings. Her body tensed. She wasn't alone. The creature was close. Her breath caught as the air grew colder, a chill that seeped deep into her bones. She instinctively turned to look over her shoulder, half expecting to see the barn behind her consumed by shadows. But there was no barn now. There was nothing. The ground beneath her feet trembled again, this time more violently, sending her stumbling forward. She caught herself just in time, but the world around her was beginning to fracture. The trees, the path, the very air. It was all shifting, warping. Eliza's heart pounded in her chest. The sanctuary was breaking apart. And then she saw it. In the distance, a pair of glowing eyes pierced the darkness. They were not the eyes of an owl, but something far more sinister, larger, wider, full of rage. The predator had returned, and it was no longer hiding in the shadows. It was no longer just a twisted reflection of a barn owl. It was something else entirely, something more monstrous, its wings larger and more menacing, its body slick with some dark, glistening substance. Eliza stood frozen, her breath catching in her throat. The creature's wings spread wide, sending a ripple through the air that seemed to distort everything around her. The trees began to bend, their trunks cracking, as if they too were succumbing to the creature's presence. She took a step back, then another, but the forest seemed to close in around her, blocking any escape. The creature was advancing, and this time there would be no owls to save her. The sense of dread that had filled the barn now filled the very air, thick and suffocating. Her mind raced. What could she do? What was it that this creature wanted? And then it struck her. The sanctuary was not just a refuge. It was a barrier, a natural force that had kept the creature at bay. The owls, the delicate balance of the ecosystem, had maintained a kind of harmony. But now that balance had been disrupted. The creature was not just seeking food, it was seeking to tear down the sanctuary itself, to break through the natural defenses and claim the land for itself. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she knew there was no turning back. The creature was not just a physical threat, it was a force of nature, one that had no place in the world of balance she had protected for so long. She was its final line of defense. As the creature drew nearer, its eyes flashing with an unholy hunger, Eliza understood that this was not just about survival, it was about something much larger. A cosmic battle between the forces of nature and whatever ancient power had been awakened.